Kumusta ka? Apa kabar? My name is Christalene Mercado, a graduate student taking a Master of ASEAN Studies at the University of the Philippines Open University. The title of this video is Colonial Footprints, Influences in the Philippines and Indonesia's Food, Festivities, Culture, and Traditions. For more clarity in the topics that we're going to talk about in this video, here are our objectives. First, we are going to discuss a brief historical background of how the Spanish and Dutch colonized the Philippines and Indonesia. Then, we will identify colonial influences in Philippines and Indonesia based on food, festivities, culture, and traditions. Third, we will recognize the effects of these colonial influences in the two countries. And lastly, we will compare the practice of these colonial influences in the modern day Philippines and Indonesia. Now that we have all our objectives, let's get started. First, let's talk about the Philippines. The Portuguese navigator and explorer Ferdinand Magellan headed the first Spanish foray to the Philippines when he made landfall on Cebu in March 1521. After King Philip II dispatched three further expeditions that ended up in a disaster, he sent out Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, who established the first permanent Spanish settlement in Cebu in 1565. Friars marched with soldiers and soon accomplished the nominal conversion to Roman Catholicism of all the local people under Spanish administration. Indigenous people caught practicing so-called pagan rituals were punished. Local histories written on bamboo or other materials were burned, and cultural artifacts were destroyed. By the 1830s, Spanish culture and thought had penetrated into Filipino culture to the extent that the Filipino people began thinking about liberation from Spain. After some attempts at independence, Filipino nationalists began to speak out. One of the most famous of the time was Philippines' national hero, Jose Rizal. His execution gave impetus to the revolution, and after ruling for 333 years, the Spaniards finally left in 1898 and ceded the country to the Americans through the Treaty of Paris. Now let's talk about the influences of Spanish and Dutch in the food of Philippines and Indonesia. Spain's 300 years of colonization left an all-encompassing influence in Filipino culture. This includes Filipino cooking techniques, especially all the food that ends with do. They have menudo, estofado, mechado, asado, and guisado. All of these have Spanish influences. During the Spanish colonization, the galleon trade led to a culinary exchange and made an impact, particularly in the salt production in the Philippines. The need for salt and food preservation led them to establish the salt industry in Cavite. They also introduced bacalao or salted cod fish. But since it was expensive, they substituted it with salted labahita. But they still called it as bacalao in Cavite. This is not the only instance when Filipinos made their own version of Spanish dishes. When the friars could eat their paellas, the Filipinos have their version called arroz valenciana or valenciana. Instead of the arborio rice with saffron threads in paella, the Filipinos substituted with glutinous rice and annatto seeds or achuete. Next, let's talk about the food in Indonesia and the influences of the Dutch colonizers. One of the most iconic ASEAN meal is ridgetapel or rice table, which was a culinary invention representing the Dutch colonial experience in Indonesia. It consists of small dishes of meat, vegetables, and fish dishes, along with sauces, satay, and shrimp crackers. Rijstapel reflects the multi-ethnic nature and different culinary traditions of the Indonesian archipelago, where the custom of elaborate banquets varies from island to island and province to province. Each has its own distinctive flavors and grades of hot spices. There are also areas in Indonesia where women are equipped with special skills in Dutch baking style. Local bakers in Bandung, Java are known to produce moist, fluffy cakes and crisp cookies. Examples are spekkoek and the klapper tart. All year round, you can encounter celebrations in the Philippines, which is commonly called fiesta. A fiesta is commonly about the celebration of a city or a province's patron saint. But how did this start? In 17th century, Jesuit priests in the Philippines reported to Rome that festivals or fiestas were organized in their mission parishes with as much ceremony and diversity and entertainment. But why? Their purpose was to promote an impressive image of the grandeur and splendor of the Catholic Church. This is also to anchor the Christian message more strongly in the minds of the Filipinos and to outshine through extravagance and color the indigenous or pre-colonial festivals and customs. What about Indonesia? So from 1800 onwards, the Dutch government permitted the Catholic missionaries to resume their proselytization of Indonesia. So unlike other Muslim-dominant countries, Christian celebrations are still being recognized as important national holidays in Indonesia. For example, we have Wafat Isa al-Masih or the Good Friday, which commemorates the death of Jesus. They also have Hari Paskah or the Easter Sunday, which celebrates the day Jesus arose from the dead. They also have Kenaikan Isa al-Masih, which is the ascension of Christ, which commemorates the day Jesus ascended into heaven. And lastly, they also have Hari Natal or Christmas on December 25, which celebrates the birth of Jesus Christ. Aside from food and festivities, there are other cultural aspects and tradition that the Philippines and Indonesia adapted from their colonizers. If you are a Filipino who will visit Spain, you can go in any restaurant and be able to comfortably ask for cuchara, tinidor, plato, platito, or taza. This shows how Spanish influences can also be found in the Filipino language, most especially in the Zamboanga Peninsula where Chabacano is being used. Chabacano is a Spanish-based Creole which is spoken and an official dialect of the region. Spanish influence were also evident through architecture of structures built during the colonial period, such as churches, government offices, and houses. Likewise, the Dutch also left behind over 3,000 words in Bahasa Indonesia. Also, all Indonesia months of the year are derived from Dutch. Aside from these, the low education system and land regulation in Indonesia were all influenced by the Dutch. Dutch colonial architectures were also built across Indonesia. The Spanish proselytization in the Philippines was so successful that when Americans arrived, most of the Filipinos were converted to Roman Catholic. During the Spanish rule, Westernized culture gradually began to seep into the Filipino way of life. Western music, dance, art, recreation, and customs were adopted by the Filipinos. Even their beliefs and perspectives about life experienced a bit of a drift away from Eastern Muslim philosophies to a more westernized perspective. Unlike the Philippines, Dutch colonial influences in Indonesia are not as prominent. After independence, the anti-Dutch attitude spread to all regions of Indonesia. This attitude started when, even after sovereignty, the Dutch was reluctant to release the West Irian region of Indonesia. This led to President Sukarno's anger, ordering the Indonesian Ministry of Law to issue a letter of expulsion to the 46,000 people or Dutch people to leave Indonesia. Aside from these, slave trading and racism were also widely carried out during the Dutch colonial period in Indonesia. In fact, in March 2020, Dutch King Willem-Alexander apologized for the excessive violence inflicted on Indonesia during his country's colonial rule. This is the monarchy's first such admission of regret to the Southeast Asian nation. Despite the restrictions during the pandemic, most of the food, festivities, culture, and traditions that was discussed are still being practiced and honored up until today in both countries. However, in Indonesia, there is this one unique Dutch custom that used to be celebrated. This is the Santa Claus party, which was celebrated every December 5. This tradition continued even after Indonesia's independence, but ended in 1957 when it was banned by President Sukarno during the dispute with the Dutch over West Irian. The anti-Dutch attitude in Indonesia led to this event being called Black Santa. If we look into these examples that was given in this video, we could say that colonial influences are much stronger in the Philippines than in Indonesia, despite both of the countries being colonized for over 300 years.